I didn't know that sitting down would change the direction of my life, but the music was soft and golden light spilled across the ballroom like something out of a movie, and for a moment, I almost forgot I didn't belong there. My heels clicked against the marble as I searched for my name on the seating chart, but everything looked the same: rows of perfect calligraphy and last names that sounded expensive and important, and not like mine. Emily Carter didn't fit anywhere on that board, not really so. When I saw an empty chair at a table near the front, I took it just for a second, just to breathe. No one stopped me, and that should have been my first warning. The silence around that table felt different, heavier, like the air knew something I didn't. I smoothed my dress and tried to act like I belonged, like I wasn't just someone who got invited last minute because a coworker needed a +1. I reached for the water glass in front of me, and that's when the doors opened. I didn't turn right away, but I felt it, the shift, conversations slowing, laughter fading, like someone had turned the volume down on the entire room. And then I looked up. He walked in like he owned more than just the space, like the walls and the people and even the air answered to him. Tall, broad shoulders, black suit tailored so perfectly it didn't wrinkle. When he moved, his eyes didn't scan the room. They claimed it one look at a time. People stepped aside without being asked, like instinct, like survival. I told myself not to stare, but I couldn't look away until his gaze stopped on me, and everything inside me went still. Not fear, not exactly, something sharper, like awareness, like I had just been seen in a way I didn't understand. His eyes dropped briefly to the place card in front of me, then back to my face. And that's when someone behind me whispered, "Too late." That's his seat. My stomach dropped. I pushed my chair back too fast, the legs scraping against the marble loud enough to draw attention. "I'm sorry," I said, already standing, already reaching for my clutch, ready to disappear like I should have the second I realized. But he didn't say anything, didn't tell me to move, didn't even break eye contact. He just kept walking until he was right there, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of something expensive and clean and dangerous in a way I couldn't explain. And then instead of taking his seat back, he pulled the chair beside mine and sat down. The movement was slow, controlled, deliberate, like everything he did had meaning. My pulse was too loud in my ears. I should have left. I knew that every instinct I had was telling me to walk away, but I couldn't. Not when his voice finally broke the silence, low, steady, meant only for me. "You chose the wrong seat." And something in the way he said it made me realize I hadn't just made a mistake. I had stepped into something I didn't understand, something I might not be able to walk away from. My body refused to move, even after he spoke, like the world had narrowed down to the space between his voice and my heartbeat. I swallowed, forcing my fingers to relax around my clutch. "I can move," I said quietly, already shifting in my seat, but his hand lifted just slightly, not touching me, not stopping me. Yet somehow I froze again. "No," he said, calm, almost polite. "You are fine right where you are." That should have reassured me. It did not. The chair suddenly felt different, heavier, like it belonged to him, and by extension now somehow to me. I sat back down slowly, aware of every pair of eyes, pretending not to watch. The music started again, but softer, like the room was careful now, like everything was being measured. I kept my gaze forward, trying to act normal, trying to pretend I had not just been told to stay by a man everyone else seemed to orbit around. But I could feel him beside me, not looking at me, not directly at least, but aware of me in a way that made my skin warm and my thoughts too loud. "You are not on the list," he said after a moment, his voice low enough that it did not travel beyond us. I blinked, turning slightly. "I was invited," I said. It sounded weaker than I wanted it to. He tilted his head just enough to glance at me, and I realized then it was not suspicion in his expression. It was certainty, like he already knew the answer and was waiting to see if I would lie. "I came with a friend," I added quickly. "She works with the bride." There was a pause, just long enough to make my chest tighten, and then he nodded once, as if filing that away. "Accepted for now." The server approached our table, hand steady, but eyes lowered. She poured champagne into his glass first, then mine. Her fingers trembled just enough that a drop slipped over the rim onto the tablecloth. "I am sorry, sir," she whispered. He did not react, not the way I expected. No frustration, no sharp correction. He simply reached for the napkin and slid it toward her, a small gesture, controlled, measured. "Thank you," he said, and she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for minutes. When she walked away, I realized I had been doing the same thing. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not a question. I hesitated because the truth was complicated. "I should be," I said finally, and that seemed to interest him more than anything I had said so far. "Why are you not?" I looked down at my hands, then back at him. "Because you have not given me a reason." Yet his lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, something quieter, something that felt more dangerous in its restraint around us. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, laughter returned, but it all felt distant like background noise in someone else's life. And then I heard a fragment of conversation from the men across the table, words spoken too low for most people to notice, but I was close enough to catch pieces, shipment timing, delivery, nothing that made sense until it did. My breath caught. I was not supposed to hear that. I knew it instantly, the kind of knowing that settles in your chest. Without explanation, I shifted in my seat, trying to focus anywhere else. But it was too late. One of the men looked at me, his gaze sharp, assessing, like he was calculating something. I did not understand. Who is she? He asked, not loudly but directly, and just like that, the air changed again, heavier, colder, like something invisible had turned toward me. I felt it before I saw it. Adrian leaned back slightly, his posture still relaxed, still controlled, but his presence filled the space in a way that made everything else fade. She is with me, he said, and this time it was not quiet. The words settled over the table like something final and absolute, and I felt it in the way the man across from us leaned back, slightly, not arguing, not questioning, just accepting, like that was the end of it. She is with me, and somehow that was enough. I did not understand why, but everyone else did. The tension shifted, not gone, but redirected. Like I was no longer the problem, just something now under his protection. I did not know whether that made things better or worse. My fingers tightened in my lap as I tried to steady my breathing. I should say something. I thought I should correct him, explain that I was not actually with him, that I did not belong to anyone here. But the look in his eyes stopped me before I could speak. It was not a warning, not exactly. It was something quieter, a decision already made, and I had the strange, overwhelming sense that contradicting him would only make things more complicated. So I stayed silent, and that silence felt like agreement. The conversation at the table resumed, but differently, now voices lower, words more careful. I caught fragments again, not enough to fully understand, but enough to know I was sitting in the middle of something important, something hidden beneath polite smiles and crystal glasses. I focused on the details instead, the way his cufflinks caught the light, the precise way he held his glass, the stillness in him that felt intentional, like he never wasted movement, never reacted without purpose. You are listening, he said, without looking at me. My heart skipped. I forced myself to shake my head. No, I am trying not to. That earned me another glance, this one longer, more searching than before. Most people would be asking questions, he said. I let out a quiet breath. I am not most people. That time the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly again, that almost smile that never quite reached his eyes. Good, he said softly, because questions tend to lead to answers, and answers can change things in ways you might not like. The way he said it made something cold settle in my chest, not fear, not exactly, but awareness, again sharper, now clearer. I had stepped into something real, not dramatic, not loud, but controlled, and controlled things were always more dangerous, because they were deliberate. I looked around the room again, at the chandeliers, at the guests laughing like nothing had shifted at all, and for a moment I wondered how many of them knew, how many of them were pretending like I was just another guest at a beautiful wedding instead of someone who had just been claimed in a sentence I did not agree to and yet could not seem to undo. Why did you not make me leave? I asked before I could stop myself. The question slipped out quieter than I expected, but it hung between us all the same. He turned his head slightly, finally, giving me his full attention now, and for the first time I saw something behind the control, something calculating, but not cold, not entirely. Because you already know too much, he said. Simply. My stomach dropped. I did not mean to hear anything I said quickly. I was not trying to listen. I believe you, he replied immediately, and somehow that was worse than doubt, because it meant this was not about intention, it was about consequences. Gaze held mine steady, unwavering, and then he leaned just slightly closer, his voice lowering, so that it felt like it existed only between us. Intention does not change what happens next. And in that moment, I understood something I had not wanted to admit since I sat down. This was not about a seat anymore. This was about being seen, and once someone like him saw you, there was no pretending you were invisible again. The room kept moving like nothing had changed, but for me, everything had shifted slightly out of place, like a picture that no longer hung straight on the wall. I could not unhear what he said, and I could not pretend I was still just a guest at someone else's wedding. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, in through my nose, out through my mouth, like I had learned during long nights of anxiety that never quite had a name. I am not part of this, I said quietly, not looking at him, because if I did, I knew I might lose whatever fragile sense of control I still had. I am just here for the ceremony. I will leave after the first dance. It sounded reasonable, simple, something normal people did at normal events. But the moment the words left my mouth, I knew they did not belong in his world. He was silent for a second, just long enough to make me regret speaking at all. And then I felt it, his attention shifting fully onto me, not rushed, not aggressive, just complete. You could try, he said, and something about the way he said it made it clear that leaving was not as simple as standing up and walking away. I turned my head, then meeting his eyes again. I do not belong here, I said, this time stronger, because it felt important to say it out loud, like if I repeated it enough it might become true again. His gaze did not soften, but it changed, slightly less distant, more focused, like he was studying me instead of the situation. That is exactly the problem, he replied calmly. You do not belong here, but now you are visible, and visible things do not disappear easily. The words settled heavily in my mind. I glanced toward the exit across the ballroom, double doors framed in gold, guests moving in and out, servers passing through with trays of champagne. It looked normal, it looked reachable, and yet it suddenly felt very far away. What happens if I just walk out? I asked, my voice lower, now more careful, because I was starting to understand that every word mattered. He followed my gaze to the doors, and then back to me. Nothing immediate, he said, and that was worse than any direct answer. I could feel the meaning in what he did not say, the kind of consequences that did not happen all at once, but unfolded later, quietly, efficiently. I swallowed again, my throat dry despite the untouched glass in front of me. I did not ask for this, I whispered, more to myself than to him, and for the first time something in his expression shifted, not sympathy, not quite, but something closer to understanding. No one ever does, he said softly. The music changed, then slower, now signaling the start of the first dance. The bride and groom moved to the center of the floor. Applause followed, smiles, cameras flashing, capturing a perfect moment that felt unreal to me, like I was watching it from behind glass. I should go, I said instinctively, the words automatic, like muscle memory from a life that still made sense before tonight. His hand moved, then, not touching me, not holding me, just resting lightly on the back of my chair. A small gesture, but it anchored me in place more effectively than anything else. Stay, he said quietly, just one word, but it carried weight, not force, not demand, something more subtle, something that made leaving feel like a choice I no longer fully controlled. I hesitated, my body caught between instinct and something else, something unfamiliar, curiosity, maybe, or the strange pull of a situation I did not understand, but could not ignore. And then he added, without looking at me again, if you leave now, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you stayed. And that was the moment I realized this was not just about danger or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was something else, something that had already begun the second I sat down, and whether I stayed or left, it was not going to end the way I expected. The music swelled across the ballroom, soft piano blending into the low hum of conversation and clinking glass, but none of it reached me, not really. I was still caught in that moment, his words settling deeper than they should have, like they had weight, like they were shaping something I could not see, yet I should have stood up. I knew that every logical part of me was still screaming to leave, to walk out through those gold-framed doors and never look back, but logic felt smaller, now quieter compared to the presence beside me. I stayed, not because I agreed, not because I trusted him, but because something inside me refused to run. Without understanding why this felt different, why he felt different, I folded my hands in my lap, forcing them to stay still as the bride laughed. Somewhere across the room, her white dress catching the light as she spun slowly with her husband, everything about that moment looked perfect, untouched by whatever world Adrian belonged to. And for a second, I wondered if I had imagined it all, if maybe I had misread everything, if maybe this was just a man with influence and nothing more. Then someone at our table leaned closer to him, speaking in a voice too low for most people to catch. But not for me, not now. I had learned to listen without looking, to catch pieces without turning my head. We should move the timeline, the voice said. There is too much attention tonight. Adrian did not respond immediately. He watched the dance floor like he was considering something bigger than the conversation itself. Then he gave a small nod. Later, he said just one word, but it ended the discussion completely. The man leaned back instantly, like he had received more than enough instruction. I felt my breath hitch again. There it was, that same quiet control, no raised voice, no explanation, just certainty and obedience. I turned slightly toward Adrian before I could stop myself. How do they all just listen to you? I asked softly, the question slipping out, because I needed to understand. He glanced at me again, not surprised, not annoyed, just aware, because I do not repeat myself, he said simply, And there it was again, that calm certainty that made everything around him feel structured, like rules existed, even if no one else could see them. I exhaled, slowly looking back at the dance floor, trying to ground myself in something normal, something familiar. But even that felt different now, like I was watching it from the outside, instead of being part of it. You still think you can leave after this? He said after a moment, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. I hesitated because the answer had changed without me realizing it. I do not know, I admitted. And that was the first honest thing I had said since I sat down. His gaze lingered on me longer this time, not assessing, not calculating, just observing, like he was waiting to see what I would do next, what I would choose. And that made my chest tighten in a different way, not fear, not pressure, something else. Something unfamiliar, like I had stepped into a story I did not choose, but now had a role in whether I wanted it or not. The music slowed further, signaling the end of the first dance. Applause followed, louder this time, people rising slightly from their seats, smiles returning as if nothing else existed beyond this moment. But I felt it again, that shift, that subtle change in the air, like something was about to happen. I did not know what it was, I just knew I was no longer invisible. And once that changed, there was no going back. And then Adrian stood up, smoothly adjusting his jacket with precise movements. And without looking at me, he said, "Come with me." I did not move at first. The word lingered between us, simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. Come with me. It was not a request, it was not even a command in the way most people would give one. It felt like something already decided, like the next step in a path I had unknowingly stepped onto. The moment I sat down, my fingers tightened against the fabric of my dress as I looked up at him, searching for something, hesitation, doubt, any sign that this was optional. But Adrian was already turning slightly, his attention shifting forward, like he expected me to follow without question, and somehow that made it harder to refuse. I should have said no. I should have stayed in my seat or stood up and walked in the opposite direction, toward the exit, toward the version of my life that still made sense. But instead, I found myself standing, the movement slow, almost careful, like I was testing the ground beneath me to see if it would hold. He did not look back to check if I was behind him. He did not need to. The space around him moved automatically, people adjusting, stepping aside, conversations pausing just enough to let him pass, and I followed a step behind, aware of every eye that flickered toward us, then quickly away, like they had seen enough to understand, and nothing more. We moved along the edge of the ballroom, past tables filled with laughter and soft candlelight, past servers carrying trays of champagne that caught the glow of the chandeliers above. Everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same, not anymore. The closer we got to the side hallway, the quieter it became, the music fading into something distant, something less real. The polished marble beneath my heels echoed more loudly, now each step a reminder that I was leaving the safety of the crowd behind, without fully understanding why. The hallway was dimmer, the lighting softer, more controlled, like it existed outside the celebration entirely. Adrian slowed slightly as we reached the end of it, a set of double doors leading to a private terrace visible through the glass beyond. I hesitated, just for a second, my instincts catching up to me. "This is where I stop," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. He paused, then, not turning fully, just enough for me to see the side of his face in the low light. "You could," he said again, that same calm tone, but there was something else beneath it now, something quieter, something that felt almost like a test. I glanced back over my shoulder toward the ballroom, the music, the people, the version of the night I had planned to be part of, and it felt far away already, like I had stepped out of it without realizing, and could not quite find my way back. I looked at him again, at the stillness in his posture, the control in the way he waited, without pushing, without insisting, and somehow that made the choice feel heavier, not lighter. "Why me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because it mattered now more than anything. He was silent for a moment, then finally turned enough to meet my eyes fully, and for the first time, there was no distance in his gaze, no calculation, just something direct and unguarded. "Because you did not look away," he said simply, and that answer settled deeper than I expected. I had looked, I had seen, and now I was here, and the doors too. The terrace stood just inches away, waiting, and I realized this was the moment, not when I sat down, not when he spoke to me, but now this was the moment where everything could still change or not. And before I could think myself out of it, I reached for the handle and stepped through the night. Air hit me the second I stepped onto the terrace, cool and sharp against my skin, like it was trying to wake me up from whatever this was. The noise from inside faded, instantly replaced by a quiet that felt too still, too deliberate. The city stretched out beyond the railing, lights flickering in the distance, like nothing had changed, like The world was still exactly where it should be. I wrapped my arms loosely around myself, not from cold, but from the sudden awareness that I was alone out here, not completely alone. I corrected a second later, because I could feel him behind me, not touching, not crowding, just there. The door closed softly behind us, the sound final, in a way I could not ignore. I took a slow breath, then turned to face him. "You brought me out here," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What now?" Adrian stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, his posture the same controlled stillness that never seemed to break. "Nothing happens now," he said, and that answer caught me off guard. I frowned slightly. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters," he replied calmly. "You are safe here." The word safe lingered in the air between us, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt so completely disconnected from everything else that had happened. Tonight, safe did not belong in the same sentence as "am not in any world." I understood safe from what I asked instead, because if I was going to stand here, I needed something real. His gaze shifted briefly past me, toward the ballroom doors, then back to me. "From being noticed the way you were inside," he said, and there it was again, that quiet clarity, like he was stating something obvious, something I should already understand. I looked back at the glass doors, the faint reflections of movement inside, the silhouettes of people still dancing, still celebrating, completely unaware of the shift that had happened just a few feet away. "I was just sitting there," I said softly, more to convince myself than him. "I did not do anything. That is not how it works," he said. "You do not have to do anything to become part of something. You only have to be seen." The words settled heavily in my chest. I turned back to him, my thoughts racing, trying to piece together what that meant for me, for this moment, for whatever came next. "So what happens now?" I asked again, because I needed to hear it. I needed something solid, something I could hold on to. His expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes now, something quieter, something almost human. "You go back inside," he said. "You finish the night like nothing has changed, and tomorrow you wake up and decide if you want to forget this ever happened or not." I blinked, slightly surprised. That was not what I expected. Not control, not pressure, just a choice that did not feel like a real choice at all. "You are giving me that option?" I asked. And this time, there was no hiding the uncertainty in my voice. He held my gaze steady. "Always," he said simply, but the way he said it made it clear that choices had consequences, that some decisions echoed longer than others. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly, not gone, but different now, more defined, more real. I turned toward the door, my hand hovering over the handle. "This is it, then," I thought. "This is where I walk back into my life, or step further into his." I hesitated just long enough to feel it, the weight of the moment pressing in, and then I glanced back at him one last time, standing there in the quiet, like he belonged to it, like he always had. And somehow I knew even before I opened that door, nothing was going to be the same again. My fingers closed around the handle, but I did not push it open right away. The cool metal pressed against my skin, grounding me in a way nothing else had all night. I could still hear the music, faint now, filtered through glass and distance, like it belonged to another version of me, the one who had walked in thinking this was just a wedding, just another evening I could leave behind. I exhaled slowly, then pulled the door open and stepped back inside. The warmth hit me instantly, the lights, the laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, everything exactly where it had been, and yet nothing felt the same. I moved carefully at first, like I was stepping back into a scene that might reject me if I moved too fast. But no one stopped me, no one looked twice. Conversations continued, smiles remained effortless, and for a second I wondered if I had imagined everything, if maybe I had created something larger out of nothing. But then I saw it, the subtle shift in the way a man near the bar glanced at me, then quickly looked away, the way another paused mid-sentence, just for a second too long, before continuing, the way space seemed to adjust around me, without anyone acknowledging it directly. I was being noticed, not openly, not dramatically, but enough that I could feel it settle under my skin. I walked back toward the table, each step measured, each breath controlled, trying to blend back into something normal, but normal no longer fit the same way it had before. When I reached my chair, it was still there, untouched, like I had never left, but I hesitated before sitting down, because I understood now that it was never just a chair. It was a position, a place that meant something whether I wanted it to or not. I sat anyway, because leaving it empty felt worse, like admitting something I was not ready to admit. The glass of champagne in front of me caught the light. I picked it up more for something to do than anything else, my hand steadier now, but my thoughts louder. "You are back," a voice said softly from across the table. I looked up. One of the men who had been speaking earlier was watching me, not unkindly, but not casually, either, just observing. I nodded slightly, Yes, he held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then inclined his head like that was enough, like he had confirmed something without needing to ask anything else. I swallowed, taking a small sip of the champagne. It tasted the same. But even that felt different, sharper somehow, like my senses had adjusted to something I could not undo. I glanced toward the terrace doors without meaning to and saw him through the glass, still outside, still exactly where I had left him, his posture unchanged, his attention somewhere beyond the room. But then, like he felt it, like he knew I was looking, he turned his head just slightly, and our eyes met through the reflection of light and glass, distance and silence. And in that moment, I understood something I had not wanted to accept before. This was not something I could just forget, not tomorrow, not next week, not ever, because he was still there, and I was still here, and whatever had started between those two moments had not ended when I walked back inside. It had only shifted, and as I lowered my gaze back to the table, trying to steady myself, I heard it again, not words, not clearly, but enough to recognize the tone, the same low conversation, the same careful voices continuing, as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had, and this time I did not pretend not to hear. The voices continued low and steady, like nothing had changed, but now every word felt sharper, every pause heavier, like I was finally hearing the shape of something that had been there all along. I kept my gaze down on the table, tracing the rim of the glass with my finger, pretending distraction, while my mind tried to piece together fragments, timelines, adjustments, attention moving too quickly tonight. It did not make full sense, but it did not need to. I understood enough to know I was not supposed to understand any of it. My heartbeat slowed, but it did not settle. It adapted, like the rest of me had started to adapt to this new awareness. I was not just sitting at a table anymore. I was inside something controlled, something deliberate, and I was still being allowed to stay. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I should leave, I thought again, but the thought did not carry the same urgency anymore. It felt distant, like something I had already chosen not to do. A laugh broke out from another table, bright and easy, and for a moment it pulled me back, reminding me where I was, a wedding, a celebration, a place where people danced and smiled and believed in simple things. But even that felt layered now, like I could see both versions at once, the surface and what moved beneath it. I shifted slightly in my chair, straightening my posture, trying to ground myself in something physical, something real, when the man across from me spoke again. "You hear more than you should," he said quietly, not accusing, not threatening, just stating a fact. I met his gaze this time, not looking away, not pretending. "I do not know what I am hearing," I replied honestly, because that felt safer than lying. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, like that answer mattered more than anything else. "Good," he said, "because pretending is what gets people into trouble." The words lingered between us, and I felt it again, that strange shift, like I was being measured not for what I knew, but for how I handled knowing it. I glanced once more toward the terrace doors, and this time they were empty. He was gone, the space beyond the glass dark, and still, like nothing had ever been there at all. Something in my chest dropped unexpectedly, not fear, not relief, something else, something I did not have a name for yet. I looked back down at the table, trying to refocus, trying to pull myself back into something that made sense, but the moment had already moved forward without me. The music changed again, faster, now more guests moving toward the dance floor, conversations lifting, the energy rising, like the night was reaching its peak. And yet I felt separate from it, like I was standing just outside of something I could no longer fully enter. And then I felt it, not saw it, not heard it, felt it, that same presence returning before I even turned my head. He was back beside me, not sitting, not speaking, just there, and somehow everything inside me stilled again, not frozen, not afraid, just aware in a way I could not undo. "You stayed," he said quietly, and I realized then that it had never been about whether I could leave. It had always been about whether I would. And before I could answer, before I could even decide what the truth was, he added, just as softly, "Now we see what that means."